In this video, I wanted to talk about opt-ins, which is located under the hops dropdown at the top of the 3D view. You can also access opt-ins in the Control-helper, and there's a dropdown for opt-ins. And in most versions where opt-ins are being added to, I just wanted to do a kind of brief synopsis to get users acquainted with it. These options are generally the most rebellious options, or the options that get the most user kickback, I feel, or that a user may or may not want to opt into or opt out of. So to start from the top, one of my favorites in this latest release is something called Auto T Panel and Auto End Panel, which I refer to as Showtime. First, we'll turn these off, and I'll also bring up my end panel, and we'll bring up Machine Tools, which is the biggest panel I can think of, and we'll press Q and we'll go into Bevel, and we can see that while I'm in Bevel, the UI is for the most part fine. However, if I press H and bring up the help, we can't see the help due to it being covered up by the end panel. So we're not able to actually get help during this operation due to our choices of having the end panel open prior to the operation. So I'm just going to right click and cancel, and we're going to go under opt-ins and turn on Auto T Panel, Auto End Panel. And if we press Q and go under any modal, in this case we'll go under Bevel, you can see that immediately it just shuffles everything off the screen. And then once I click to apply, it brings everything back. And this is what I refer to as Showtime. It's one of my favorite features of this newest release. It just, I presented the problem of, hey, the help is getting covered up by the panels. We need to come up with a way to solve it. And this is my favorite solution for it. The next thing I want to go over in the opt-ins is the modal handedness. For some users, you may find yourself being left-handed, or incorrectly find yourself being right-handed. Me personally, I wouldn't be caught right-handed on a Friday night, but left is the way to go. So basically it chooses whenever you go in something like Bevel, moving the mouse to the right will make it bigger, moving it to the right will make it smaller. If we go in Array, something like Array, due to the way that Array works, it just has to be the way it is. There is no left or right-handed Array. There is, basically, if we go into 3D, there is no other place to set this than placing it at the mouse cursor. So that's basically left hand, right hand inside of modals. The next thing is talking about the background color. Whenever you go inside of a modal operation, you'll notice that the help has this color to it. I generally like to go in and change it to another color, just depending on my mood that day. I always lean towards pink for some reason. Don't judge me. But now we can see that I have a nice autumn kind of orange going, and we can just go back in there and change to something else, maybe like a nice calm kiwi green, but we want to definitely relax on the green factor a little bit. So I might push the S down a little bit, and that'll get us something a lot more neutralized, kind of a little darker green, So that is the modal background color. Help scale is for the help display, of course, depending on if you're using a retinal display. For my screen, the help works perfectly fine at 1.0, but in the event that the help is just too big or too small, we can lower this to something like, say, 0.7, and we can see that the help is much smaller, which will definitely come in handy if you're using like a 5K display or something. Modal Warp is also new to this version, which basically will use a custom warp border. Right now we have a padding at 75, so if I press Q and I go under Bevel, you can actually see these warp pads in the corner of the 3D view, and these will basically wrap your mouse in the event that you rotate your view. And it just became problematic to use Blender's internal warp and keep things working the way that we wanted, so we had to come up with our own custom warp in order for things to work out. For users using a tablet, we of course are exploring ways to make things easier for tablet users, but the gesture of moving your hand all the way across the screen isn't really the most optimal gesture for using a pen now, is it? But we'll definitely be doing something about that. Operator text pertains to text that displays during operators. The most famous operator inside of hardops is pressing Q and choosing something like sharpen, which is a sharpening tool. And you see this text displayed at the bottom, just letting you know what happened with the operation. If we were to deselect and add a camera, you can also see that there's a display for the camera. Basically everything has a display. We can go under add modifier and choose toggle modifiers, which will turn them off. We see that this also has a display. In the event that you do not want operator text, you of course are able to turn that off but I would just recommend leaving it on. It's not like it's a performance hit on the computer, and the extra information will definitely be to your benefit. Bevel profile is something that a lot of new users sometimes have issues with. We tend to use 0.7 due to its ability to stack a lot easier than using a profile of 0.5. However, if you're the type of person who wants all your bevels to always be at 0.5, like the same defaults in Blender, then you would just set this to 0.5. So when it comes to array, the default array inside of hardops is the ST3 array, which was the one shown in the last demo for Neodymium. If we press Q and we go under array, we can see that this array has a circle that can't be clicked and dragged, which caused a little bit of contention. But if you hold control, you're able to move the mouse, which works good and all. However, when it comes to making very fine movements and fine adjustments with this, it's a little bit more problematic. ST3 array V1 actually served more of a prototype for us to try to integrate a modal with both a fast and a expanded UI, which is why in this version you can press tab and go into a completely different type of array that still has the same type of operation but has a dynamic help and modifier panel that you're able to go in and mess with. Like I said, this array is pretty much a prototype to us and was just kind of a block on the journey to come up with the actual array workflow that we want to present to users. So we'll just go ahead and right click and cancel that. This isn't a history lesson on array. We'll go under opt-ins and we can actually choose to opt in to either the most classic array. So if you're following the oldest of hops tutorials, you can actually go back to the most default array, which believe me is inadequate. You're better off just using the newer arrays and just lamenting on how much better it is than the tutorial that you're probably watching. So if we change this to ST3 array V2, this means that now inside the Q menus and in the pie menus, for example, if we go to Shift Q and we expand, we can see that ST3 array is also here. And when we bring it up, this is just your general type array that's like a hybrid of what our classic array workflow was, of just moving the mouse, holding shift to get very fine adjustments, rolling the wheel in order to add additional segments, but also has added benefits of us being able to navigate around the view, move things around, just kind of really position our view. But it also has the added benefit of basically allowing you to press V in order to go into a 3D array, where whenever you scroll, instead of adding segments at the end, sequentially it actually adds them in between, which makes for a very interesting type of array. So me personally, I'm always going to be using ST3 array V2, and we aim to actually get this at the level that is capable of being the default in the next major update of hardops. So at this time, we want users to actually experiment with the various types of arrays for themselves, maybe find the array that works for them, but definitely give ST3 array V2 a shot and see if it's a good enough array to take over for your needs. When Add Camera was first added to hardops, we had it just place the camera just at the front, looking down, track to an empty, and it was just kind of static, kind of boring. And so if we go under the opt-ins, we have an option for frontal, which is actually the classic behavior. If we bring that up, we can press Q and just add camera. We see that it just adds this camera in the front, just kind of real boring, just a generic camera. In fact, we see how it's placed, just up top, 12 Blender units looking down exactly as it was when I originally asked for it. However, over time it became apparent that a better version of this could exist, and that's where view comes in. So if we change it to view, that means that if you press Q and you add a camera, it will actually add a camera to your view, and we can press GZZ and just position that out. So now we're just looking at this camera, and we'll just let this rotate, and that is it in a nutshell. Of course, we've expanded it to make it where whenever you add a camera, it also adds a marker to make it easier to make it the active camera on the timeline. But in a nutshell, that is the difference between frontal and view with 2 camera in the new version of hardops. The next new addition that I want to talk about is BC notifications. This one's one of my favorite options. The backstory on it is that whenever we first put out the update of Boxcutter 716, there was a misunderstanding with the drawing information down here and how we were conveying information to the users. And someone made the judgment call to actually remove this in order to get this information panel down here. But that actually removed our ability to let users know the distance of the array, to let them know the count of the array, to let them know the bevel amount, the width of the bevel, the amount of segments, this sort of information, having it all constrained in the lower left corner of the screen is something that just irks me. Of course, me being me, I want this information to be shouted from the highest rooftops. So for that reason, BC notifications exist. In order to show this in its best light, we'll press Q, go under settings, and under key map prefs, we'll bring up our preferences for hardops. And under operator options, we'll turn on operator background and operator border, and we'll just save those preferences. And what this means is that whenever we bring up notifications, there will be a background on it, and we can see the notification actually doing its job, basically conveying a lot of the same information from inside of Boxcutter, but just a little bit more clear to users who are using both hardops and Boxcutter at this time. Of course, we have intentions of giving Boxcutter its own UI and widget system down the road. It's something that we've been working towards, but in the meantime, I did want to solve this in a very clear way to users, as well as perform a test of sorts to see if we can use a tool to assist other tools and to see how far we can actually take such assistance. So BC notifications is there for you to help you see more information as far as what's going on with Boxcutter. The next one I want to talk about is the Sequential Q Menu. We'll go ahead and turn this off for now. And what this means is that whenever I press Q and I go through the Q menu, everything's stacked up as you may be used to in all the previous content. And all the content, I just had the Q menus just stack up, and I just fought between consolidating and shrinking them every version. However, it finally became apparent that we could actually have a toggle in here for actually stacking these options side by side, which may make hops appear a little bit less intimidating to new users. They can go in, look through the options, find the option that they want without having to scroll through a long list. It especially became useful for add modifiers, where if you're working on a slightly more cramped display, having to scroll down a list, inside of a pop-up can be a little bit of an irritation. So at some point I do want to do a video talking about all of the reasons that we made modals for these particular modifiers and why we deal with these modifiers and not just all modifiers. But continuing on, that is stacked Q menus or sequential Q menus in a nutshell. Blank matte, similar to Viewport, I discussed in a previous opt-ins video, where this is something that I don't generally use, but if you're using material scroll and you want your material in the viewport to look just like the material that you scroll, whenever you scroll, you're able to do so. Normally we scroll and we get a random clown material in the viewport, which helps with just quick object delineation, and also allows me to have a very different result for the render. I'm looking at clown renders here in the solid view, but if I press O and I jump over to render, we see that we're scrolling through variations of types of metal and plastic types of blank materials. So that is what blank matte, similar to Viewport, does in a nutshell. I do want this behavior to extend to classic blank material at some point, but at this time we are experimenting with it on material scroll. So the next one I want to talk about is radial twist. And so if you were to say have an object in your scene and we just do a few cuts, maybe mirrored across, let's look at it from the front. Of course it's never from the front, so we'll just apply actually we want a geometry to mesh, then alt transforms, and so we'll just take this moment and just do a dice, and we'll press T to twist it so that it twists it afterwards. So now we have this dice and twisted form that we're adjusting modally, and because of the warp we're able to adjust our view, we're able to roll our mouse in. You might have seen in a very old video talking about this where I had to actually stop and restart the operation in order to make this go through. But that aside, if we click and apply and we press Ctrl tilde to look at our helper, we can actually look at the modifiers that have been added. And all of these modifiers have their render disabled, which basically will make them not show in the render. If we were to press F12, we'll get a result that's not what you're actually desiring. However, that is the reason that sync exists. For example, we can just go in here and shift click this, and then when I press F12, everything's good to go. But the reason that we actually do this sort bypass is so that in the event that you want to just do this operation and then afterwards just go and perform box cuts on it without the sorting actually going haywire and cutting the individual piece that's being arrayed around, you're able to do that. But being able to work this way is good and all for the creative side, but when it comes to rendering and the presentation, it's a little bit more problematic. So me personally, I like to work where it actually has the mods disabled to prevent them from sorting, allowing me to iteratively work. And at the end, I could just select everything and just shift click sync in order to just sync everything for the render, which will just fix the modifiers to be exactly as they are in the viewport, so that whenever I press F12, I get the exact result that I'm going for. So the next thing inside of here is to talk about Viewport Set Render. This one is one of my favorite options, and I can't wait to show it in conjunction with KitOps. But basically, if we were to just, open up a scene here, we'll just pop open my last one. If I were to press Alt V and go to Look Def Plus, I can actually begin just scrolling through different environments. I'll press M and close my environment list just so it's not distracting, and we can just scroll through environments. If I were to press T, I can actually make it jump to light. If I press R, I can actually make it jump to render. In the event that you actually want to adjust your look dev and have it jump to your render automatically, you can do that. So I will go in here and we'll turn on Viewport Set Render. And if we look at the render is exactly the same thing as the viewport. But if you press Alt VV, we can go through, just quickly start jumping through these. And whenever I click and jump over to render, it's exactly the same result. So if you want to just remove those keystrokes and you're sure that every time you adjust your look dev that you want it to definitely be your render, then by all means give this option a try. So I hope that that was a bit of a good overview for the opt-ins and hard ops and what they mean, because they're definitely there for you to users. For the most pro users of pros, I would just recommend just pressing Q and going under settings and just locating your preferences. I'm not able to at this moment with collections, but we'll select this mesh and press Q and we'll bring up our preferences. And the preferences is really where you want to go in and perfect everything that you have going on. Like for example, under operator display time, sometimes I like to read slow. So I'll leave it up for about 10 seconds so that if I were to select something and run sharpen, it will actually stay up on screen long enough for me to talk about and discuss, hey, I set up a sharpness of 30, an auto smooth angle of 60. Additive mode was true, which means that edges were added to the sharpening solution and not taken away, and 0 modifiers were applied. But with that, we can wrap up this video, and I'll see you guys next time.